I'm Jan Doyle. Welcome to Wyse Talk. Today's guest is an extremely talented and creative woman. Her name is Sheri Cifaldi-Morrill. Sheri, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me,
Did
Jan.
I mess up your name?
A little bit, but it's okay.
Let's get it straight for the camera. What exactly is your name?
Sure, it's Sheri Cifaldi-Morrill.
Yes, I want the audience to know I've been practicing it for the last hour, and I still got it wrong. I got it right 2 or 3 times.
Not an easy one. So.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. Now, you're the owner of Whole Circle Studios. What is that all about?
Sure. Whole Circle Studio is my business name. It's right now just me there, and I am a designer, a quilter, and a pattern publisher of my quilts. And I also, well, I know we'll get a little bit into it, license some of my designs for other purposes as well.
Well, I first met you well, you didn't know I met you, but I met you. There was a wonderful article in the New Haven Register about you, and it was brought to my attention, and I brought you to, because I do programs for the Shoreline Quilt Guild, and you came and gave us a presentation, and everyone was just crazy about your work.
Oh, thank you.
They just really, really loved it, and so what I thought it would be a great show. So I'd like to start, we have a piece hanging behind us, and what do you call this piece?
This is my Modern Love quilt.
Modern Love. And where did it get the name from?
So it started with, there was the first quilt I designed in my Love series was called Big Love. And it is a modern interpretation with frequency waves, sort of based on frequencies waves and what the word love might look like. And it was a quilt that exhibited around the country. It won a few awards here and there, and it was really popular. And from that, I decided to take the design and make it a little bit more simple, and also publish it as a pattern for other quilters to make. So that's sort of the story behind the quilt.
Well, it's really an interesting quilt, and it also goes along with the new movement in quilting called modern quilt. Why is it considered a modern quilt?
So modern quilts, and I say this all the time, it's, as with any art form, it's very subjective, and I know that even within the quilting community, a lot of people are like, is this modern, is it not modern? So I think I'm not big on labels, but it's good sort of the background. So modern quilting essentially takes sort of sometimes takes traditional quilts and updates it with either more negative space or brighter colors, or using a lot of solid colors like I did here. Traditional quilts technically use very small prints, sometimes calico prints, more subdued colors. In modern quilts, you'll see sort of an amped up color, more asymmetry. Yeah, so there's a lot of different descriptions.
And I was just wondering if our cameraman can get in a little bit closer and show us some of the quilting on this quilt, because it's the pattern, it's the design, and it's really also about the quilt itself. Now, I'm noticing the lines are very straight. Do you mark your lines, or you just echo?
It depends. Sometimes I will mark. In this quilt, it was really important. I wanted to really use the quilting to accentuate the vertical nature. So I actually just used what they call a walking foot, which attaches to my sewing machine. And there's sort of almost 2 forks that come down between the needle. And I'm kind of clever that way. I use my fork as a guide when it does work. If you want something a little bit wider, it doesn't always work, but I use sort of the tools that I have to help versus just marking.
Smart.
Yeah.
Well, this must have been very popular because you made a pattern to go with it.
I did. So it was on exhibit, and a lot of other quilters liked it and wanted to make it. So part of my business is explaining and doing lots of diagrams and written explanation and giving all of the material requirements, the fabric materials, so that quilters can make their own version of it, and they could use the colors I selected, but oftentimes the most wonderful quilts come out of ones that people take my patterns and kind of make their own spin on it.
Yes. Now there's a variation on it. This is called Big Love, correct?
This is Modern Love, and Big Love I know we have a photo of.
We have a JPEG of. So in a moment the director is going to put it on the screen. It's there now. And when you look at it, what made you go from that to the one behind us? Let's just ask you, How did you design this quilt?
So yeah, so the one up on the screen now is Big Love, and that was the first one in the series. And I was inspired by what, as I mentioned earlier, frequency waves when you said the word love. And that was the one that's on the screen was what was at QuiltCon and at other national quilt shows. And from that, the one that is sitting behind our background, I made a more simple, sort of more subdued.
That was the word that came to my mind, more subdued. Although I like what's on the screen that the viewers are
Yeah,
seeing.
I love both of them. It was a lot more work, a lot more detail in the one that's on the screen.
Yes. Now, you mentioned a couple of times the word QuiltCon, and I don't believe our viewers know what that is. So if, can you tell us what QuiltCon is all about?
Sure. So QuiltCon is the annual conference of the Modern Quilt Guild, which is a national organization, and the National Modern Quilt Guild has local chapters, I think about 300 throughout the world, and there's actually 2 here in Connecticut. So QuiltCon is a venue, a conference that modern quilters and even some non-modern quilters, anyone can go to it, from all over the world go to, and they have it in different parts of the country. This year was in Savannah, next year is in Pasadena, and I'll actually be teaching there next year.
Oh, how exciting.
I'm pretty excited. I've been to 3 QuiltCons, and this will be the first one that I'm teaching at. So there's workshops, there's lectures, there's a huge quilt show that's people submit their quilts to be in, and they usually jury in about 300 quilts, and they have up to some years 1,800 quilts that get entered.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, so it's a really great venue, a great conference for people to learn more about modern quilting and also to go to and be inspired and meet up with friends. I've met people from all over the world, from Australia and all over the US and the UK and Europe, and once a year we get to see each other. Everyone sort of convenes there.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, quilters love fabric. They love the touch of it. They love the look of it. They love working with it. So, and to go and see everything in one venue, it's just really inspirational.
And of course, there's places where you can buy all that too.
Oh,
They have people, big companies, big and small, come and set up and kind of show you the latest and greatest, and you can also buy and see what's
Oh,
new.
absolutely. You have to buy. But I want to talk a little bit about when I first met you. I understood you've won a lot of awards. Tell me about some of these awards.
I have. So the first award I won was actually through the Modern Quilt Guild. It was the first version of my Picnic Petals quilt, and there's one version behind you. And that's really sort of by winning the awards, and awards are very subjective, but it's sort of what was, I'm a designer at heart, my background is graphic design, and by winning some of the awards, I was like, maybe I have something here, and that was sort of the first steps that really encouraged. It is.
It's very validating.
I say that with a grain of salt because it's also very subjective who's judging it and what they feel like that day. So I also wouldn't want people to get discouraged if they've entered things in and they didn't win awards. It doesn't mean that it's any less. But for me, it was validating. And it was a really great experience. Yeah, so I've also won some awards at QuiltCon. I've entered shows 2 years ago. The Big Love quilt that we saw, a smaller version of that, won first place in the small quilts category. And I've also, last year, was awarded through the organization Craftsy, their Quilt Designer Fellowship Award.
Now, I thought that was very, very impressive. Craftsy, what did they give you when you won that award?
So the major part of that award was they did some consulting with me, kind of growing my business, but the major part was they rented a booth at International Quilt Market, and that is a huge deal. It happens twice a year, once in the spring, and the big one happens in the fall every year at Houston.
We have a slide of your of your shop.
Booth.
Well, this is we went to
Yep. So what's on the screen now is actually a shot from QuiltCon 2 years ago. And that's my Lots of Dots quilt that was showing at QuiltCon. So you can kind of get a sense of the space. It's a pretty big convention center, and there's lots of quilts.
And there's also, that's a huge quilt. Do you remember the size of that?
That's a queen size quilt. I think it's about 86-inch square.
Did you quilt this on a domestic machine?
I did. So a domestic machine is just a sit-down machine that most people think of.
That your mother had.
Yeah,
Yes,
my
yes.
machine, it's a little bit bigger, the space sort of between where the needle and all the controls are. When I purchased mine, I got the largest, they call sort of a throat space the biggest space possible, because when you're pushing queen size quilts, you have to roll them up and push them
Well,
on
that's
through.
very, very dramatic. I love that quilt. I
Thank
love
you.
that quilt. And you would consider this a modern quilt then?
I would. I think, there's a lot of black and white. There's high contrast is one of the attributes to modern quilting. I've used a lot of solids, but there's also a few prints very sparingly in there.
It's nice. So now going on to the next slide is the slide of your booth at Quilt Market.
Yes.
Was that it?
Yes.
All right, explain this. First of all, that's a great booth.
Thank you. So Quilt Market is to the trade only. So what that means is not just anyone can walk in. You have to be sort of a qualified buyer from a quilt shop or in the industry, a book publisher in the quilting community or a fabric company. So so that was my booth where I'm basically showing my quilts and my patterns, what I'm selling wholesale to shops.
You know what? I think I was a little confused because there's also a huge
There's
one
Quilt Festival afterwards, and that is open to the public. So I was only there for the industry only for market.
That's very good for yourself.
It was. So Craftsy rented me the booth, which is pretty pricey. If you're going to just the space with no furnishings, basically you just get a concrete slab and that's it. Is like $2,000. So they rented that, and everything else I had to ship down there. I had some friends in Texas who had furniture, so it was a whirlwind of setting up the booth for 2 days and picking up things and then shipping it all home
The
after.
flooring, you even brought in the flooring?
I did, yeah. That's actually, it's just sort of a faux wood flooring that's kind of cushy, because if you don't, you're standing basically on a concrete floor for 3 days.
And then you had to put up the
walls.
and
Yeah. My
that
husband
interesting?
built that quilt ladder off to the right, and the big table, the round table up front, I borrowed from a friend. And so all of my quilts I shipped down there. I did a lot of planning in the months leading up to it, so I had a good plan going in. I did a 3D model on my computer of what I wanted my booth to look like, and made sure I had business cards.
What a good idea, a 3D model. What program did you use for that?
I used SketchUp.
Okay, I have no clue.
And Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, which having a graphic design background, I'm familiar with. So
Oh, okay. And I love the quilt rack, your husband.
Yeah, he's pretty talented. And he
Yes.
was my crew for sales crew and setup and breakdown crew as well.
Was this part of the requirement when you got married, that he had to do these things?
No, it was the thing that sealed the deal.
Oh, okay. I believe it. I believe it. So that's very, very, very impressive. And the fact that you won a fellowship is very impressive.
It is. And I actually just, I'm continuing my relationship with them. We just signed an agreement next year that I'm actually going to be a contributing blogger to their website as well.
How great.
So that just literally, the paperwork just went through.
That's fantastic.
So my relationship, so the other great thing about being at Quilt Market was making relationships with fabric companies and other pattern designers and publishers. So I've really been spending since October really building on those relationships and being in touch, and so I have a couple of other things in the works as well.
Now, I have a note here. You went to Paducah? Did you go
I
down?
didn't. My quilt did.
Yeah,
so I didn't.
So this is
haven't
like
gone.
separation anxiety. Your quilt. Which quilt went to Paducah?
Big Love that we showed on the screen earlier was at Paducah, and it won. Actually, I forgot that won an award at Paducah as well last year.
Do you feel like a sense of, there it goes, my child is going out into the world, or are you just excited for
I'm
it?
excited. I think the thing about quilting, at least my opinion on it is they're meant to be shown, they're meant to be used. That's the other big modern attribute with modern quilting, which isn't. I know some traditional quilts, not all of them, but people are nervous about them being used or babies being on them, and I quilt and make everything so that it can be used. It can be displayed as a work of art, and I've had some of my quilts used as art, but they're all made, they're all constructed so that they can be washed and dried and all.
Oh, that's an interesting distinction, because I'm with a group of people where you wouldn't even, first of all, you wouldn't even consider washing it, and for God's sakes, don't put a baby anywhere near it.
Yeah, so that's a big thing. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not a hard and fast rule. Like, there's probably some modern quilters that don't feel that way. But in general, modern quilters believe quilts are meant to be used. And, when they're not being used, not to be in direct sunlight so that they fade, and, maybe don't put it in the dryer, but the washing machine is okay. So, and I wouldn't say that for all quilts, but again, we're talking generalities, which you
Correct.
have to, yeah.
Now, right behind me is, what's the name of that quilt?
That's my Picnic Petals quilts. And that is the second version of it. This was another one. So I mentioned earlier, one of the very first award I won was for my first picnic petals, which I know we have a photo of as a JPEG. And that won a few awards as well. And again, quilters were really interested in it. So I adapted it, and I have that as a pattern as well.
Well, let's look at the JPEG of the original version. Now, that's the one on the wall,
yeah.
but this is, now what made you change this version, the original, to what's on the wall?
So the first version we'll talk about first, that is actually another good example of modern quilting taking traditional, so that's a traditional block called the flowering snowball, which a lot of people who have been quilting for a while may have noticed. What I had done was played with the negative and the positive space, so that's one way I made it modern. There's a lot of solids in there, but I also added some prints. To be quite honest, that quilt, I updated it. The original design is still the same if you make the queen size version, but I made the blocks a little bit smaller just to be more efficient with fabric. So I didn't want people to be wasteful. I didn't know that enough when I made the first quilt. So then one of the things I strive for when I make patterns is for people to make it very clearly and use their fabric efficiently so that they're not just left over with like, oh, if she just made it a little bit smaller, I could have squeezed another block out of it.
Right,
so that's where the second version, and I wanted to play to see what it would look like in a different colorway. So the quilt behind you, that gave me that opportunity. I wanted to make another sample while I was working on the pattern, and I was like, while I'm at it, I might as well see what if I quilted it different, what if I used different colors.
Now there's a wonderful graphic up there, the new one and the old one. That's great in the producing room. Thank you, guys. Now this shot, I'm also noticing there's a lot of, in your quilts, the white is a predominant feature. Is that true of all modern quilts or just your work?
Not all, but again, it's one of those attributes that you'll see a lot more white space or negative space in modern quilts.
Now why do they call it negative space?
Well, the positive would sort of be the most prominent. So my stripes would be the positive, and the background would be the negative. And that's sort of something in the art world you'll hear a lot about as well, positive and negative space.
Do you think your training as a graphic artist has influenced
Absolutely, without a doubt. That's what got me into quilting.
Really?
It is. So my background is graphic design. I went to college for it. I practiced in the field for 20 years. I still do graphic design as well. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I collected a lot. Actually, before that, 15 years ago, I started collecting quilting books. I was really drawn to quilting, but I didn't know how to sew. So I was like, how am I ever going to make a quilt? So I collected all these books and I used them as inspiration for just graphic design projects I was working on. And about, at this point, 5 years ago, I was going through some challenging things and I needed a good distraction. And I was like, something just clicked in me. I went and I just bought, I didn't know any better. I bought the cheapest fabric possible, and I got one of my quilting books and I just started making a quilt and I fell in love with it. And so I had some wedding presents I wanted to make, and my niece was born and I made her a quilt, so I was using other people's patterns, and after about 4 quilts I was like, wait a minute here, I'm a graphic designer. I could be designing my own quilts, and I use Adobe Illustrator and InDesign, which is what you use for graphic design, to do my layouts, and it was just, the rest is sort of history.
Well, I know over here you have some of your patterns, and how many total and I know there's one here and one here. How many total patterns have you designed?
So right now I have 10, and I have
that's a significant number.
It is. I have 3 more in the works that are in different phases right now that by the fall will be released.
Okay, wow. How long does it take, the process from designing it to printing it?
It really depends. It depends on how complex it is. I usually have people test it as well, so it's not just me making it. I want to make sure it's very clear. So it can take anywhere from 2 months to 6 months. It depends how complex it is, and it also depends how many other things I'm working on, because it's not just one pattern at a time that I'm working on.
I want to make sure I get to, the pattern's right here, and you call it a mini quilt.
Yep.
Buzz. I prefer buzz.
That's fine too.
I'm sort of ruining all your vocabulary here. But if you want to hold this up,
sure.
Tell me about this quilt. This is the bee quilt.
Sure. So this is my bee quilt, and this has been one of my most popular quilts. It actually, I originally designed it a smaller version this as a donation to the Quilt Alliance, which is a wonderful not-for-profit an organization that really tries to talk to other quilters about the importance of labeling your quilt and preserving your quilt and telling the stories behind the quilt.
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second because Henry has a wonderful shot here. He's showing the honeycomb of your quilting, and I love that. And he's showing the quilting here because I know I'm not going to be long for holding this up.
That's okay. Yeah.
But
So,
I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the organization.
Yeah. So I made one. I designed and made it as a fundraiser for them, and I was really inspired. It was this winter of 2015, I think it was, when it just snowed like 3 feet of snow every other week here in Connecticut. And my husband is a backyard beekeeper, and
Is he
is. So that was
really?
the inspiration. So my studio overlooks the beehives, and they were just covered in snow. And it was that time of the winter where everyone's depressed, and I'm like, will it ever get warm? So I designed the bee quilt inspired by that, and it's been really, really popular. I know beekeeping is super popular, and I think that really is part of the popularity. So I've had lots of quilters make it, and I've had quilters ask me, really loving the design. So I've looked at licensing of products with this.
Well, I noticed. First, I just have to ask you:
Yeah.
do you eat your honey from?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Is there enough to sell, or do you just enough
We
for the
don't
house?
sell it. So, like last year, we didn't get enough. The year before, we got a huge amount. So we eat it regularly, and special friends and families gets it as gifts.
Christmas.
It's a great Christmas gift.
Oh,
and
it
also,
is
if I
indeed.
go to a party and I don't know what else to
Oh,
bring.
what a great idea!
So when we
yes.
made labels and all of that. If
Great
you ever want to
idea.
know about beekeeping, you can talk to my husband.
Well, that's an idea. Maybe that would be a show,
There you go.
actually. But I also want to just mention you made a pin to go with
I
this.
do. So one of the bees I took and I produced enamel pins that I sell as well. So if people aren't into quilting but like the design and want to support the bees, they can purchase the pin. And I've also looked at other licensing, which I'm doing for other designs as well. But I worked with a t-shirt company where I've licensed my Buzz design for T-shirts, and I
Well,
also
here's the.
produce
Now, this
fabric.
obviously won't fit me. Or why don't you put it against you? But it's a wonderful T-shirt, and then you have something over here. To me, it looks like a handkerchief, but
It
it's
is.
not.
It's a fabric panel. So again, if someone didn't want to piece the quilt, but just wanted a fabric panel, they can purchase the fabric panel as well.
I have a suggestion.
Sure. I'm always open to suggestions.
Yeah, my suggestion is this really is wonderful. I would like you to do various insects that people can buy to make a whole different quilt, all the favorite. Like I'm thinking praying mantis. Have you considered that at all?
So I've started to do that, and I have one
She
here.
took my idea.
Well, I haven't.
She took my idea already.
I also have, it's in 2 colorways. This is the daytime one. The nighttime
Dragonfly.
one is on actually at a gallery right now, but this is the second in my insect series, my dragonflies.
So could you do like just one so people that would color coordinate with this so people could purchase as many as they wanted to
They
make a quilt?
certainly could, yeah.
And what a good idea,
Yeah.
Jan Doyle.
There you go, I
Yeah,
like
so,
that.
Yeah. So this is good. And my director talked to me a few minutes ago, and I was talking, I didn't hear him. But if you could just repeat that and let me know how much time I have left, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And why don't we just show what this is over here?
Sure. So this is actually one of my latest quilts, and I'm going to be teaching this as a workshop. I also teach. This
how
is
pretty
what I
is
call,
this?
there's a traditional, for quilters out there will know, there's a traditional pattern called the double wedding ring.
Yes,
this
there
is
is.
my double wedding knot that I designed. And I actually have 2 very close friends that just got married. So this is actually, they've seen it, but they haven't received it yet. I still have to finish the label. This is my wedding gift to them, and I'm
I
also
might be
working on a
getting
large
married.
one.
The cameraman is laughing because he knows it's so not true. But
What?
he just knows it's not true. But I just thought, okay, fine. This really is beautiful, though.
Thank you.
And I love the colors.
So the knots are machine pieced. I pieced them all together on a machine, and then I actually hand appliqued. So it's a second layer on top.
Henry, can you do a close up on her quilting? If Is she hand applique this on? And it's machine quilted? This is very, very nice. Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
And I love all the different colors. And it's a great way to use up scraps.
It is. It is. So I'm
That
working
quilt
on a
is
couple
like-
of other variations. I'm working on a larger one. I oftentimes have one design and then make different variations on it.
Now, we don't have that much time left, and so I want to make sure we get in your contact information. And that's the last slide that we have on Whole Circle Quilts. And I would just like you to, so you can be reached, that's your website?
Sure. The best way to contact me is at my website, which is up on the screen now, wholecirclestudio.com. My email address, you can contact me through email. I also have it.
What is your email address?
Sheri, Sheri, at wholecirclestudio.com, which you can reach off my website as well. I have an e-newsletter that kind of gives updates from the studio every other week. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. And all of the links are on wholecirclestudio.com. So that's sort of your one-stop shop for email and everything, all ways to contact me.
That's wonderful. And then if people don't remember that, they can always they can always contact me at jmdteach@comcast.net, or they can always contact the studio, BCTV, and they'll send along the message to me if you want to get in contact with her. We only have a minute left, and as they take us out, why don't you just hand me the 2 pillows so I can just show that, and we can kind of go out on the pillows.
So I often do mini quilts, and there's only so many mini quilts you can have as wall hangings. So I've turn a lot of them into pillows. So this is my Up and Away.
And you do have a pattern for this.
I do. I have a pattern for that. And this is another really great scrappy quilt. Use
Oh,
up
it is.
scraps.
It's wonderful.
And I've been teaching a lot making Hawaiian quilts modern, Hawaiian applique made modern. So this is one of my smaller samples on that, which is the background is machine pieced and the front layer is needle turn applique, and then it's all machine quilted. And this is another really fun pattern to play around with different colorways.
Yeah, and people, quilters, and even beginners, this is easy for beginners, especially a reasonable amount of fabric to buy.
Right.
They can go to any quilt shop, or when I go into schools and give workshops on the Underground Railroad, and I tell the children they can even use their old clothes, and cut that up, or go to any of the consignment shops and pick something up, or Goodwill, and so it doesn't have to be brand new fabric.
Absolutely not, especially when you're getting started. It's just whatever you have laying around or whatever you're trying to use up. I'm a big proponent of.
Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you
coming.
for having
It was
me.
wonderful. This time just flew by.
I know, it did.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. So this